Mr. President, just 3 days ago, a bipartisan majority of the members of the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform endorsed a package of proposals to reposition our nation on a more responsible fiscal course. And I want to commend my good friend, the senator from Illinois, who was a member of that commission and took what I thought was an extraordinarily courageous vote on a package of proposals that, quite honestly, I know he didn't agree with every one of them, but didn't understand how serious this issue is. I want to thank him and all my other colleagues from both sides of the aisle, and the economists and policymakers and others who invested in the time and effort and courageously grappled with these difficult choices. On Friday, Mr. President, 11 of the 18 members of the Commission voted to support a tough, bipartisan prescription for fiscal health. I regret that the 11 yes votes fell just short of the 14 votes required to forward this plan to Congress for our consideration. Now, in the hours leading up to Friday's vote, I was proud to work with 13 of my Senate colleagues, including the presiding officer, to draft a joint letter to the White House and to the bipartisan congressional leadership. This letter, signed by 14 senators and distributed before the Commission's final vote on Friday, requested that the panel's recommendations come to Congress for our consideration regardless of the outcome of the Commission's final vote. Mr. President, I ask consent to place a copy of this joint letter in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have reason for coming here to the floor today, and it's drawing attention to our letter into this issue once again. The seriousness of our nation's fiscal challenges, the compelling need to address these issues in a responsible and bipartisan way, did not suddenly dissipate or magically disappear over the course of the weekend that just ended. In fact, since the Commission's final meeting ended on Friday afternoon, the national debt, the running tally of what the United States government owes, has increased by an estimated $15 billion. $15 billion just since Friday. Our total national debt staggers a $13.8 trillion. Again, let me repeat that. Our national debt is approaching $14 trillion. You know, every day you can listen to a lot of talk from people in this town about deficit reduction. But as I said when the Commission first unveils its proposals 1 week ago, while I would have made some different choices, we were being presented with a unique opportunity to finally get real about the deficits and debt. Actually, the Commission came out, I was a little more blunt than what I just said. Said that for all the campaign rhetoric about deficit reduction, the time had come to put up or shut up. And I believe this Commission earned credibility by describing our fiscal challenges in stark and honest terms. They deserve our respect for crafting a clear roadmap to help steer our nation back to a more responsible fiscal path. The Commission's leaders and its members made difficult decisions, and they did not shy away from examining both expenditures and revenues. They concluded correctly that our nation's fiscal challenges are too serious, and the fiscal hole that we've dug ourselves is too deep to simply be looking at one side of the ledger alone. Simply saying that we can tax our way out of this or cut spending alone won't get us there. Now, to be sure, there is something for everyone to dislike in these recommendations. But that is simply a reflection of how large the problem is. Whether you look at this report and are concerned about the viability of Social Security, whether you're concerned about tax rates, the level of defense spending, or any other specific government program or service, failing to act makes those choices and decisions even tougher every day that goes by. But this Fiscal Commission came forward with a framework for improving our global's economic competitiveness while still maintaining our shared commitment to protect our most vulnerable citizens. One of the things I think that got lost in the headlines last week was, while this took an enormous positive step towards deficit reduction, this commission report also did two other things that we hear a lot of talk about in this chamber. One is it overall lowered business tax rates and also dramatically simplified the individual tax code and got rid of a lot of clutter. Now, this commission also deserves enormous credit for recognizing that the hard work of getting our nation's fiscal house in order is also an urgent matter of national security. Because it's clear that America cannot be a leader in the world, projecting strength and promoting democracy, if we are weakened at home by our deficits and debt. Mr. President, ever since this economic downturn began, individual Americans and their families have been required to make tough choices about how to make their own ends meet. It's time that those of us here in Washington were to do the same. Many of you here know that I came to public service after a relatively successful career in business. In the business world, investors and shareholders had a reasonable expectation at the end of each fiscal year we would end up balancing our company's books. And like the presiding officer, who was a mayor of a great city, I had the honor of serving as governor of Virginia, where with a 2-to-1 Republican legislature, we actually worked in a bipartisan way to make the tough choices required to balance our state budget during tough economic times. Proud to earn Virginia's distinction of being named the best managed state and the best state for business. Now, I've only been in this body, as the presiding officer has, for about 2 years. But one thing I've already learned is that if Washington can find an excuse to punt on a difficult decision, it almost always will. And most days, it's a lot easier just to retreat to our partisan corners and default to the political gamesmanship you see every day on cable TV. But, Mr. President, as the current economic upheaval in Europe so clearly demonstrates, we cannot simply ignore this challenge because it's inconvenient or because the choices are just too tough. Maybe 20 years ago, our country had the luxury of having the rest of the world have to wait until we got our act together before they could move forward. But anyone that surveys the other economies around the world realizes that China, India, even Brazil are not waiting for us to get our financial house in order or getting our act together. Now is the time to make these tough choices, not when the bond market finally loses their patience and their confidence in our long-term economic viability, which is what recently happened in Greece and now Ireland, and who knows who's next. The fact is, if interest rates were not at historic lows today, we would already be in a world of hurt at this point. As it is, if we do not take action soon to stabilize our debt, we could be spending upwards of $1 trillion a year just on debt service by 2020. Think about how many taxes would have to be raised or programs would have to be cut just to meet basic debt service. So now it's time for us to agree that we will now not allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And all own the political discomfort. And our own political discomfort should not be used as an excuse to delay holding an honest and long overdue discussion about the complicated fiscal choices confronting us today. Every day, every week that we put off that discussion, our options become more limited and the choices become tougher. Resolving America's fiscal problems must be one of our top priorities. It will require difficult decisions. There's no easy fix or no easy way out. But those of us who are hired by folks across the country should expect nothing less. Mr. President, appreciate the chance to address this issue, and I again want to compliment my good friend, the senator from Illinois, for his courageous leadership on this issue, for his vote on what I know had to be a very, very difficult decision. But if he and, frankly, some other members on the other side of the aisle who kind of said, even though this was not a perfect plan, it was more important to bring this discussion forward. I compliment them on their actions. I compliment the presiding officer for joining with me and a number of other colleagues. We will be back on a regular basis to continue to bring this issue before our fellow colleagues, and the people of the country. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.